So Chevra, good evening. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 Prakim Rambam. We are in Maase, Hakorbanos, Prakim Yud Gimel, Yud Dalid, and Tezvav, beginning with Perek Yud Gimel. Perek Yud Gimel is going to start going into the details of the very different types of menachos that we began in the sugya of menachos in the Rambam and Perek Yud Beis. We're going to learn about the Chavite Kohen Gadol. We're going to learn about the Minchas Soilas, how we mentioned already yesterday in the previous year in Perek Yud Beis, that really there could be 3 times when oil will be applied to the carbon mincha. There's what we call the matnas shemen bakeli. Then you have the belila, the mixing of the oil. Then you have what we call the yitzika, the pouring of the oil. And we're going to learn the minchas machvas, the minchas marcheshes, the minchas ma'afei tanur, which in itself, as we said, has 2 pratim. There can be chalois or the kikin. And we're going to learn about the seder of the bringing of the menachos. Perek Yud Gimel has 14 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph. Zok the Rambam, mitzvahs asay, it's a positive mitzvah. Lasois kol mincha kemitzvaso amur b'Torah. Mamash, the same lashon that Rambam uses by the Hakorbanos from animals. We're using the same opening when it comes to menachos. Beginning with the Chavite Kohen Gadol, Zok the Rambam halacha beis v'keitzar asiyas Chavite Kohen Gadol. That maybe isarin shalom umagdishay. First, the Kohen Gadol brings a isarin, which, as we learned, is the minimum amount of flour needed for all of the menachos. V'choitzeyu b'chatzi isarin sheba migdash. And he divides the 1 isarin by using that clay in the Beis HaMikdash. So we learned in the Beis HaMikdash there were many clay shadasin that were to measure liquids. There were only 2 to measure solids. Here we go, the solids. So there was a keli that had the amount of a half a isarin. Sha'af al pi shehi kerei v'chetzoyin eina miskadeshes lachatzoyin. In other words, first you're magdash it in a clay shadas of 1 isarin. And then you divide it into 2 halves. Umevi ima, together with this 1 isarin, you bring 3 loig of shemen. Now, it's normally the klal is, like we mentioned, that for 1 isarin you have 1 loig of shemen. There are exceptions. Here we have an exception. Shenemer, as it says, ba shemen teyaseh. And the Chazal learn over there, the Torah uses the words al machavas. And there is a limut shemen. Bekitzer, just like by Minchas Nesachim, you have 3 loig of shemen. If you remember, the Minchas Nesachim, the ones that come as an accessory, really you have different shiyurim. You have from the par, or from the para, or even from the egel, from the large animal type, you have a half a hin. But from the smallest animal type, from the keves, the kizba, not from the ayol, there we have a 1/4 of a hin, which is 3 loig of oil, and there's the shemen, the Chazal learn out, and that is lo hoisiv, lo shemen, at least like the smallest keniske hakeves, like we mentioned, for which you bring for the 1 isarin 3 loig of oil. 1 second. Oh, I apologize about that. Oh, boile. So, mamish freilech la yuda ma'isa oira. I'm in nut. Oh, boile. Hashemen. Hasoilas b'shemen. You mix the soilas with the oil. And v'choyle toisem v'roischen. And then you have to scald it with boiling hot water. And then every detail, the losh mikol chatzi isarin from each half, because you remember you divided after you are magdash the holy isarin, you divided it into half, also by using the clay sharis, and each one of them, right? The losh mikol chatzi isarin sheish chalos. Now the total you will have will be shteim esrei chalos. Now says the Rambam, actually when you made these chalos, you didn't make them all together, but the achas hoyonasis. How would you do it? So the Rambam explains, what really happened was you didn't mix them all together. But guys, if 3 loig is going to be used for the flour, but you're going to make out of it 12 chalas, so every loig is 4 reviasin, which means that 1 revias is a 12th of the 3 loig, which is exactly how much oil is needed for each challah. Revi'is l'chol challah. And you and first you only bake it a little bit. like we learned before, you have to scald it with water. So first you bake it. And then you will fry it on a flat frying pan. In other words, you don't even use all of the revias to begin with. The revias that's going to be used for this challah, some of it is used in the beginning, then you use some for the frying. But you don't have it fully cooked, because the Torah uses the words tifune or tufine, and tufine is a composite of two words, of cooked, right? That's the fei, and then the nun is for na, so it should be bashel v'na. Gavaldik. And then actually you take each challah itself and you divide it into half. Now that's done by approximation. Why is that? Because when the Torah says that the chaviti kohen gadol, half was brought in the morning, half was brought in the afternoon, not pshat 6 whole challahs in the morning and 6 whole in the afternoon. No, each challah was divided into half. So it's amazing. So in other words, even though you divided the flour, has nothing to do. You make each challah separately, using a total of about a vias of oil for each challah, and then when you have the 12 challahs, you divide them into half. And then from each half that you have, you fold it weiter to l'shnayim. In other words, if you had the challah and you divide it into half, so you're beginning with half, and then when you divide that again into half, in order for you to have a broken mincha, the Torah uses the words many times that pasois oisoi pitim, you have to divide it into shtikalach, into pieces. That will be the piece, so it's a piece of a piece. It's a fourth. Umakre b'chatzoyin in the morning, im chatzi kaimetz levayin babayk, and then everything, the half of whatever you have left over, which is half, the other half, chatzi ganishad im chatzi kaimetz levayin ba'erev. This is the chavite kohen gadol that the kohen gadol brings every single day. But if you have the minchas chinuch, we're speaking both about the kohen hedyot doing the avodah for the first time, and the kohen gadol serving the first time as a kohen gadol. They don't bring half in the morning, half in the afternoon. The quantities of the carbon is exactly the same. The way to prepare it is exactly the same. That means you're going to have a total of 12 chalas. But ella makriva kola ka'achas, with the whole kaimetz, with the whole avodah. Ushteyem kolel ishim, and they are going to be totally consumed on the fires. Halacha hey. And now let's begin. So as we said, we have these 5, the 5 of the 9, the 5 final of the 9. The first of that, these are the korbanos that can come as a neder or an adava, right? Minchas soilas, machvas, marcheshes, ma'afe tanur chalois, ma'afe tanur rekikin. That's the 5. And the Rambam is going to go through every single one. Minchas soilas ketzar nasis, maybe isada in soilas, 1 isada. Or if you want, again, when you make a donation, what did the Rambam say yesterday? The minimum is an isarin, but you can have as much as you want. Oy kame Israel is kfinidroi. Now here, unlike the Chavite Kohen Gadol, we had that shemen from the Minchas Nesachim, which is also the exception that sometimes you would have 3 loig for 1 isarin. Right, then you had the 4 loig for the 2 isarin, or the half a hin for the, so you, for the 3 isarinas. Here the rule is for every isarin 1 loig. If you made a neder to bring 10 isarins, fine. So then you have to bring 10 loig. Umaydid be isarin shal migdash, and you imbue the flour with kedushas haguf by putting it into the kli sharis. Which one? The one that measures the entire isarin. Now, v'noisen shaman b'keli, oil, not all of the oil, not all, but some of the oil is going to be first put in the keli. It's after you magdish the flour, when you are going to begin the process of adding the oil to the flour, not flour then oil, but you would first put oil in the keli. Again, not the entire loig, because we're going to use it many times. Number 1. Then, you put all of the soilas. Then you add more shemen, not all of it, but a lot more of it. Uboilo hasoilis boy, and now you have how to knead the minchasoilis. Right? It's not going to be scalded here with water. It's flour and oil. And now, now you put it in another klei shares, now that you have what we would call the dough, flour and oil. And the third oil application by the soilis is going to be yitzika, or here in the singular, vitzak l'toiche shemen. Oil will be put onto it. You're not going to mix that oil anymore. You're going to have as a layer of oil on top. Now, v'shemen shenasan tchila im shemen habolol im hashemen sheyotzak. All of these three oils, the first matnas, the shemen in the keli, then the oil that you're pouring to do the belila, to doing the mixing, and then the yitzika. All of them is one like for the isarin. So if you brought 2 esrainas, so you're going to have 2 loigen, so divided equally. Now I don't think it was divided into thirds. There was a seder, a little bit of oil. Mistama, the roiv of the oil was used when you did the belila. And then you poured the remaining oil on top of it, and only after, now that it's readied, so what you have is just a mixture of soilus. You have a mixture of dough. That's why, if you remember, we learned, was it 2 days ago, the whole chiddush that even this mincha, the shirayim, is going to be divided by all of the kaihanim of the Beisav. Even though everyone is getting just a piece of dough. That means after they get the shirayim, then they have to bake it. And now the levaina, which is always only 1 fistful of levaina, is going to be put on top of whatever amount of flour oil that you have. That's mincha soilus. And you can appreciate the word soilus. Soilus, I know soilus means flour. Point is that it's offered, not prepared more than just having this dough with no water, flour and oil. Vav. Now, minchas hamachvas and the marcheshes, like we mentioned, they're both prepared very similar. The only difference is that machavas, it's when it will be fried on oil on a pan, it's going to be a flat pan, and therefore, since it won't have a lip, so you have to make the dough harder. And the marcheshes is a pot that is deep fried. It has a lip, it has a rim, which allows for the batter to be softer. Okay. Keitzad. So this, it's equal to the soilus that first, noisen Hashem and bekli. And only after you put some of the oil in the keli, then v'noisen all of soilus. And after you put the soilus, v'noisen all soilus, shemen acheru boilel hasoilus. But now, right, before, that was it. That was just yitzika. No, not now. Now, v'chakach, lasha b'poishrin, and then you're going to need it with warm water. Ooh, that's now, you have to be careful, it shouldn't become chamestik. And now you will bake it. We already mentioned baking doesn't only have to be in an oven. Baking means now you don't have water in the pot. Machvas will be either the flat pan, or you're going to now bake it. Only use the koyach of the fire. B'marcheshes, in a deep pan, depending on how you vowed. If you said harei alai or harei zu minchas machvas, then you use the machvas. If you use the word marcheshes, then you do marcheshes. And then, or pieces, here also you would have to break it into pieces. And now you put it in the clay shades. And now you're going to have the final step for the third time, the third oil application. And then the levain is put all on top. Explains that Rambam. Marcheshes is a pot that has a sof, it has a rim, or it has a lip, however you want to call it. It's a deep pan. And therefore, the dough could be soft. It's not going to roll out. It's not going to roll off. It's not going to fall down. Machvas is a pan. You're only using the koyach of fire. But since the pan has no lip, so the dough to begin with is made harder, firmer. Okay, so we went through 3 of the 5 neder and adavas. Soilus, machvas, marcheshes. Now we're going to go to the final 2. They're both called ma'afei tanur, but one is ma'afei tanur chalois, and the other is called ma'afei tanur rikikin. Halacha ches. Says the Rambam that minchas ma'afei tanur keitzad im chaloisi. So if it's the one ma'afei tanur chalois, loaves, then boilel hasoilus b'shemen. As you will notice over here, you don't begin by putting oil first in the keli. That step is not done over here. You begin by taking the flour. And by taking the klal, for every yisarin, you have to have 1 loik. If you made a donation to give 10 yisarins, 10 loik, whatever it is. First, you have to mix it. Uboilel hasoilus b'shemen. Afterwards, you're going to be lush b'poishton. You will add again the warm water to knead it further. And you will bake it. Not the way we learned before in the machvas and marcheshes. Pashut, you're going to put it into an oven. And after you baked it, you will break it into pieces. And you put it into a clay shadis. And then you put on top of it the levaina. So over here, you don't have Yitzika Shemen. Truth is, you don't have two of the three. You don't have the Nesina Shemen Bekeli, nor do you have the normal, the final Yitzika. Shenemar, Chalois, Matzois, Belulois, Bashemen, all that is done is the Belila, to the exclusion of the first and the final oil application that we just learned above in the other Hakorbanos. Now that's called Chalas. Now what would make it be called Rikikin, which is the fifth? The Im Rikikin Hi. So Losh Es Hashsoiles Bapoishrin. You don't first knead it with oil, you lechatchila mix it with water. And Umoishach Es Harakikin B'Shemen. And then you anoint, you put the oil on top of it. Shenemer Urikikei Matzah is defined by they are Meshuchin B'Shemen. Now, hold on, they're ma'afei tanur. So really what happened is that you didn't knead it in oil, you kneaded it only in poishrin, you put it into an oven. This is the most similar to the way we make bread today. After you remove it from the tanur, then you would be moishech it, you would smear it with the oil. So here again, there was only one oil application, which is called the meshicha. Halacha tes, v'keitzad moishchan. So maybe loik shemen l'chol yisodin. Now again, if you didn't put the oil in the keli, you're not doing belila, you're not doing yitzika. For every yisodin, you have an entire loig. So what happens is, if you're going to pour oil on top of this bread, it's going to spill to the sides. So you smear it or you pour a little bit, and the oil gets absorbed in the rikik, in the wafer. Then you pour more, and then you pour more until all of the oil is now smeared on top of this rikikin. All of these four types of breads that are baked. Why is he mentioning four? Because the only one of the five that's not baked is the soilis. You take for every yisaron is made into 10 chalas. However, that's not essential. Is going to be kasher. When we mentioned that they have to be broken into pieces, now the Rambam explained the breaking into the pieces by the Chavite Kohen Gadol. In other words, you had 12 loaves, and you broke each one into half. You break every loaf into half, and you offer, and then every remaining half you fold again into half, and you break it. Let's learn over here. Same idea, but you did it all together. You folded it into two, and then v'hashnayim la'arba. Then you folded it. I'm sorry that I lost progress. Yeah, I'm sorry that you lost you guys over here. And then you folded it the two into four. Umavdil, and after it was folded twice, then you break it apart. In which there is no kimitza, in which everything is burnt on the altar, then einoi mavdil upaises, but all of it is offered straight on the fire. Every piece will have at least the SARS of an aleph. That's the goal. Now, again, don't forget we're all beginning with the isarim. But the im, higdal apsisan, higdal if they're larger or smaller, again, it's going to be okay. This kezayis is not ma'akiv. Halacha yudalef. Loi balal, when belila was needed. Loi pasas, when psisa was needed. Loi higish, as we learned in yesterday's shir, that you have to bring it to the edge of the keren. Ma'arav is deroimis. Loi mashach esarakikin. Nevertheless, it's kosher. Loi nemru kol hadvarim ha'elu el mitzvah. That's the proper way of doing it. Gavaldik. So now we mamash went through all of the menachas, and now we're going to go through the seder of. We spoke it out balpeh when we finished the shir this morning, yesterday's shir. Now let's read inside from here until the end. Seder havos hamincha keitzad, says the Rambam. That maybe Adam soiles. I'm sorry that I'm losing you guys over here. Maybe Adam soiles on teich beisoy because shal kasav shal zav. The flour you can bring from your home. And the flour is brought in containers that are chashiv, silver or gold. It has to be a keli that's ra'oi to be a klei shares. This is not a klei shares. Interesting, it has to be ra'oi. And we spoke out already that a klei cheres is never ra'oi to be a klei shares. Ve'im hoysem minchas soiles. So now, actually, noisna leklei sharis umekacha be klei sharis. But if they're going to be baked, so then oifa oisam shamba migdash. Now we also learned about the ovens. Now we'll appreciate better why the ovens have to be made out of metal. In other words, if you're not going to be baking it, so then the klei sharis is that which is magdashit. But if you're going to be baking it, the tanner was magdashit. And then you put the psisin in the klei sharis. And also what we mentioned when we began the Sol Sugi and Pedicute Bays is that you're going to have at least two pudding of the ingredients in a klei sharis. So here you had it in a klei sharis, you are magdashit, or the tanner was magdashit, but after you break it, you put it into a klei sharis. And and you bring it to the kohen. Now, atkan does not need to be done by a kohen. The kohen is the one that takes it to the mizbeach. And he approaches. The keren the remes marav is where keneged chuda shel keren. He only has to go near one of the keranais and vidayoi, and that is sufficient to fulfill your obligation of hagasha. Vaiter umesalek. Now comes the kemitza. Now we kept on mentioning that the levain is put on the top. But if he's going to stick his hand in it, he's going to go into the levaina. The kemitza is not done at all from the levaina. So b'meila, he moves the levaina to the side. And v'koimetz, ideally, if there is a not equal, not harmonious application of the oil, if you notice that there's more oil here and less oil there, do the kemitza in the place where there's the most saturation of oil. Shenamaratz, it says misolta umishamna. We learn both things. Aleph, you don't make the kemitza from the levaina. It's only misolta mishamna. And also, you want it to be the most gepregelte, the most faroiled part of what you have in front of you. Now you have the kemitza. And the kemitza will invite to be put into a klei sharis. The noise and our koimitz klei sharis, umekacha be klei sharis. The koimitz shechilkai b'shnei kelim einoi kaddish. So what do? You have to make sure that both parts are going to be put again into one keli. It's the final sanctification, which is done dafke to the koimitz, has to be done dafke in one keli. But don't forget that we put the levaina to the side. The levaina is going to be offered. So Vait says that I'm vayte. Umelake es kol levinos, and now you gather all of the levaina. The noisna al hakoymet shebekli. You already have this final klei sharis. In it you have the kemitza. The kemitza can be from the pieces. You have to appreciate how it's not that easy to make kemitza. We'll speak in a moment about the kemitza. But you're making kemitza many times into a wafer. You're making kemitza into a baked loaf of bread, and you're getting it perfect. Not too much, not too little. It's a big chachma to make a kemitza. But now you would put the levaina on top of that kemitza. It's now that the kohen walked up on the altar. Always, everything needed to be salted, aside of the three things that we mentioned in the dinim of the salting. The noisnoi al gabi hoishim, and he will put it on top of the fires from the klei sharis. Again, kemitza. That's what we learned in Pedicute Bays. That's only if it's a mincha from a non-male kohen. But if it's a mincha of a zichrei kahuna, eno koimitz, elanoisen melech al kula umashlich hakoil al Gabe Ha'ishim. Halacha Yud Gimel says that Rambam Keitzad Koimtzin Menachis Hanikmatzis. How do you make kemitz? So here it's good to have a visual. So says that Rambam Kederech Shekoimitz Kol Adam. It's the way any person would take a handful. Let me tell you the best I could verbally what is done and what should be avoided to be done. If you're going to put your hand in a downward motion and you're going to have the back of your hand facing to the in front of you, and you're going to put your hand into whatever is in front of you, and you're going to make a scooping motion to scoop something up, you want to do your best to have the product here, the mincha, in between your fingers and your palm. That is the proper kemitza. Before we get into the details of how you're using your thumb and your pinky, what we avoid doing, we don't want to have a scoop in where all of the product, all of the minchas in your finger area itself. That's not ideal. That's a much lesser amount, and that's not the correct amount of kemitza. So, which means upaishet pas yodei v'koimitz. You have to extend your fingers over the palm of your hand. So when you scoop, your fingers are trapping whatever is here, in our case, these menachos, between your fingers and your palm, not in between the upper parts of your fingers and your lower parts of your fingers. That's too little of a scoop. If you only use your fingers, or min hatzedadim, now min hatzedadim, different ways of understanding what the Rambam is saying. Either using the sides of your fingers, or it means using, getting it from the sides of the container, not sticking your hands properly inside of it, then lo yaktir. However, again, all of this, ve'im hiktir, then hurtza. Not im komatz yaktir. Even if you did kemitza, do it again. But if you already burnt it, then it hurtza. Now, if you added to the koimetz, not too little, because you only use the tips of your fingers, but it was too much, how would you make it too much? That you would not keep your fingers closed. So then, puzzle. Now let me add something that the Rambam is not writing, but it's taken for granted, obviously. That when you're making a scoop, getting whatever type of minchas in front of you, in between your fingers and your palm, you're really only getting it in between three of your fingers, which is the index, the middle finger, and what we call here the ring finger. The kohen would actually use his thumb, and he's going to move it back and forth, making sure that any of the soilus, any of the mincha that's protruding outside the area of index and palm, and also using the pinky to remove any part of the mincha that's protruding beyond the ring finger and your palm. We don't want that to be included in the koimitz. And that's the point that Rambam is trying to make over here. That even though im hiktir hurtza, if it was a little koimitz, more than a koimitz is not good as puzzle. Final halacha, yudalid, ein koimitz pachos mishnei kezeisim. That's a fact. It won't be less than 2 kezeisim in a kemitz. Even though people have different size hands, that will be the minimum amount. Once you made the kemitza, all of it has to be offered. And if almost all of it was offered, not good. There's no atonement. Hakoimitz v'halavayna also both have to be burnt. And if you did one without the other, it's not valid. Ma'akven zedze. Hasoilis v'hashemen ma'akven zedze. Gevaldik. And mixas hashemen ma'akiv kuloi, like we mentioned. And ein pachos miloy gli yisarayin k'may shebiyarnu. So there will be the exceptions where you're going to have more than one loig for one isarin. Like, minchas nosach, going back. You can have one isarin for the keves, or for the kizba, or for the seira, as long as it's a little one. And you're going to have 3, but they'll never be less than the one loig for each isarin. And thus we conclude the seder of the details of the menachos. We're going to start now learning Perek Yud Dalid. The Rambam is going to speak about korbanos, all korbanos that are able to be donated as a neder and an adava. So we're going to speak more about the difference between a neder and an adava. We're going to review some dinim that we learned, that when you make a vow, piv v'liboy, what you said and what you intended to say has to be aligned. All right? We're going to learn a gavaldik rule that we never had until now, that by nedarim and nedavos, you don't have to make a verbal commitment. If a person committed in their hearts to bring a korban, they're chayiv to bring it. We're going to learn that you're not allowed to delay, or in the positive, when you made a vow, bring it ASAP. There is some point where you already violated the positive commandment, and at a later point, you will also be violating the loy sa'acher l'shalmai. And finally, Perek Yud Daled has a famous halacha that even though a korban has to be given willingly, if a person made a vow and they're not giving it, there is a level of coercion that must be done. But the coercion is for the person to say, I'm doing it b'ratzon. Koifen oisei acha yomid roitza ani. Perek Yud Daled has 17 halachas. It's today's largest chapter, beginning with halacha aleph, says the Rambam. Misnadev adam v'noider, a person is able both to make a nedava. We'll see soon. Nedava means is when you say, this is an oila. Neder means it's upon me to bring an oila, a shlamim, and v'chol min sheyirtza, from the 9 menachos that are from a yachid, the final 5, all of them can come b'neder and adava. And quickly reviewing, as we learned in Perek Yud Gimel, as the Rambam introduced in Perek Yud Beis, the minchas soilis, the minchas machavas, the minchas marcheshes, the ma'afei tanur chalois, and the ma'afei tanur rikikin. Another thing, since the Torah specifies the quantities of flour, oil, and wine that have to accompany many times the animal korbanos known as nesachim or minchas nesachim. If a person wants, they can make a vow that harei olai to bring a minchas nesachim, but then he has to specify from a keves, from a ram, or from the bakar, and then that person will be obligated, even though they're not bringing that with an animal, but they're going to bring that type of mincha with its quantities and the way it's prepared, as we learned in Perek Yud Gimel. Right, again, the keves and the ayil and the bakar, or the par. Even though the Rambam clarified par doesn't only mean adult, it even means an egel, but that's where you bring the most amount of isarin and a flour and a flour, oil, and wine. Another din, a person can vow either as a nadava or a neder just to bring wine, or just to bring the oil, or just to bring levina, or just to bring the wood. Each one could be considered a korban. Mepnei shehem ki korban shenemar apasa harai from the chemya ule kurban ha'etzim. Halacha beis. Shnayim misnadvim. 2 people are allowed to make a nedava. 2 people can make a neder to bring 1 animal, 1 korban, whether it is an oil or shlamim, or even if it's a bird korban, or yafilu prei da'achar shel torah v'nei yaina, it can be brought in partnership. However, listen to this, my friends, a mincha can never come in partnership. Why? Divrei Kabbalah. That's the way we got from Moshe Rabbeinu. Halacha Yimel. What happens if someone pledged to bring a mincha, and they separated the mincha, and the donor passed away? So in most korbanos, not in all, in most korbanos, the children bring it on behalf of the parent. Now, if a guy left 2 children, we just said a mincha cannot come in partnership, they do bring it. Because even though the kids are bringing it, they're bringing their father's neder or nadava. The father was one. Halacha dalet. Now, neder nadava, let's clarify. Ezu neder ve'ezi nadava. Stam lohoyer, the Rambam Seder is not always the same. He began with nadava first, but let's go. Ho'emer harei olai. If the obligation is on the person to bring an oiler, to bring a shlamim, harei olai mincha, or even if it's not even to bring the animal, but harei olai, the money of an animal, right? Harei olai, the value of this animal to be used as an oilah. Harei olai, the money of this object to bring it as a korban shlamim. That's called a neder. The obligation is on the person. But if he points out something specific and he says, this is a korban. This is behemazu. Or even if he says, the mei behemazu is an oilah. We'll see. Or shlamim, harei isarein hazeh mincha, that's called a nedava. And the big fundamental difference, halacha hey, or ma bein nedarim lenedava, is when you put the obligation on yourself, even if you already separated the korban, and later beyond your, it was stolen, it was lost. Doesn't matter. You were not guilty. Doesn't matter. You were not a pshia. You made a commitment that you will do something. You got to follow through. Chayav v'achri yusan. You have to go until, if you separated another animal and it was stolen, I'm sorry, it's your loss. But when you make a nedava, this is an oilah. Well, if this was stolen, you don't have to replace it. A guy says the value of this ox is upon me to bring as an oilah, upon me to bring as a korban, and then the ox died, the house fell, as we learned before. Since you took it upon yourself, you have to pay. Omar harei olai, but on the condition that I'm not going to be chayiv and achrayis. Even though you use the words olai, your clarification is effective. Ein chayiv achri yuso. Halacha zayin. Kfar biyarnu, the Rambam is going back to Perek Tes of Bias HaMikdash. If you remember that, Chonyoy tragically felt dejected, rejected. He ran away to Alexandria, Shal Mitzrayim, and he built a temple. in the same dimensions of the Beis HaMikdash. He did not build it Avodah Zarah. So the Rambam writes, we already explained that Shehois Habayis, Chutz LaMikdash. But in order to bring Karbanis to God, even though one is not allowed to do that, it's not like a bias of Avodah Zarah. And therefore, now guys, just know there's an Isur Kodesh, to bring a Karban outside the Makam HaMikdash. So we're not minimizing that sin. But the point is that if a person makes a vow, and he says, Harei Olai Oila, Sha'akriveno Ba'mikdash. He said the word Mikdash. If he brought it in that location, he's not Yoitz. If he brought it in Beis Chanyoy, because he said Mikdash. But if he says, I'm designating this, or it's upon me to bring in oil, to bring it in Beis Chanyoy, so look at the irony. Even if he brings it in the Beis HaMikdash, you're Yoitz. If you bring it in that house, you're also Yoitz. Why? Hareu commission other oila almanas that he should not be chayv and achrayis. And that's why, even though his words, but bias hazeh, not being met, since it's for God, adarabah, bring it in the Beis HaMikdash, and you'll be yoitz. Now, don't forget that if you bring it the Beis Chanyoy, you'll also be yoitz. That was your condition. We follow what we said, but you're going to be chayv kodesh, God forbid. V'chein. And another detail, Stam, even though if you're not allowed to do it, if you remember the whole sugya of Nedarim versus Shvuos, ain't Shvuah Chal to be mevatel la mitzvah. Right? Because ain't Shvuah Chal al Shvuah, we are mushboim vo'emdim mahar Sinai. But a neder is Chal, even, God forbid, to be mevatel la mitzvah, which is basically what this guy did. He made a neder to do something for which is a chiyuv kodesh, it's effective, and that's what he said. That I will shave. We're speaking about someone who, after he concludes the Nizida's vow, they have to shave all of their hair. If he said Babayis Azeh, if he shaved his head there, he's Yoitza. Now it's more than that. Not only is he Yoitza, he's not a Nazir. Not to be a Nazir, you have to bring the Hakorbanos and the Beis HaMikdash. Yeah. But the moment you mention the house of Chanyoy, then we don't view your vow, lechatchila, as a real vow of Nazirus. We view it as a person who took upon themselves to be mitztayer themselves, not to have wine until they shave their hair in Beis Chanyoy. So that's why it's effective. Harehu kamish, another la'al atzayir atzmai, variyatzir atzmai. It's not a real din of a Nazirus. And even though that a part of his vow is he's making up like there's no thing, I have to shave my hair by Beis Chanyoy. Okay, when he did that, then he's done with his vow. Halachaches. Chatos va'asham, unlike everything we began in this chapter, the oilon, the shlamim, and the 5 types of menachos, and then the other menachos, and a bird oilon shlamim, a chatos and a asham can only come for a sin. They can never be brought not as an eder nor as an adav. And therefore, or if a person asham, those words are nonsensical, which in a good way. So there's no consequence. Now, but if this guy was obligated to bring a chatos, he did that sin, he did the sin that demands an asham, and he says then his words are binding. Halachates. However, if a person says, there's another mitzvah, or there's a woman that gave birth, she is obligated on day 41, on day 81 to bring karbanis. The mitzvah at the end has to bring karbanis. We're not the yoledis, we're not the mitzvah, but we are saying, I take upon myself to bring karbanis for them. So, now, both in the Mitzvah and the Yoledes, some of their karbanos will be dependent on their financial status, accordingly, animal or bird. So if the Mitzvah for whom I took that vow, if they are aniyim, then the one who made the vow will bring a karban for them, a karban ani. If they were ashirim, even if the one who made the vow is an ashir, right? Even if the one who made it as an ani, he says, I'm bringing it for them. If they are Rashidim, my vow was to bring what they have to bring. Halacha Yud, Ha'omer, Chatosei, Va'ashami, V'ilosei, Yishlamim, Shopleni, Olai. Reuven sinned. And Shimon is saying, I'm taking upon myself to bring the Chatos for Reuven, to bring the Asham of Reuven. So first of all, you should know that if the sinner acquiesced, then the other person can buy it for them. Now, what happens when, again, the sinner is Reuven? Shimon made the vow. When Shimon made the vow, Reuven was fine. But then when it came to bringing it, Reuven says, it doesn't feel right. I sinned, I got to bring it. While they were bringing it, he changed his mind. The sinner says, no, I don't want you to bring it. I want to bring it myself. So like this. Then, because the fact that he wanted when he designated it, it's good enough. And let me add something. All of that has to do with the fact that when you brought the carbon, when you were makriv the carbon for chatas or asham, there was a vidui that needed to be said. So if the sinner doesn't want for that animal to be brought on his behalf, he's not going to say vidui. No, that's why it's not affected by the chatas and the asham. By other karbanos, it doesn't matter. He agreed in the beginning, good enough. Halacha Yud Aleph. So we learned the sugya. It's righteous people really avoid making vows. They really avoid making oaths. They avoid doing it. Now, Rishoyim used to be very quick in making vows. Like the Gemara says, like two people were debating, even for something good. Two chaverim. A tells B, come to my house. B says, I don't want. A says, nah, come join supper. B says, if I'm going to eat in your house, then I'm making a vow like the wicked. What do they mean with these words? Wicked people, they make a neder, they make a shvuah, they obligate themselves to bring karbanos, like a neder. That's what he meant. If a person just says, it's upon me to do that which the wicked vow, then that statement includes that he took upon himself to be a nazir, he took upon himself to bring a carbon, and it's an oath meaning, if he was trying to imply that I will not eat, if he eats in his friend's house, then he broke an oath. Chayiv b'kulan. But if he uses the words, I'm making a vow like the kshedim, kosher people don't obligate themselves on anything. So actually what he meant to say is, I don't want to go, but bli neder, like the kshedim. Harei like nidvas kshedim, if he uses the words, harei olai, not kinidre, harei olai kinidras kshedim, so then harei zen nodar ben nazaru bekarben, so then a neder is what the kshedim don't do. Nedava, kshedim bring. What's a nedava? We explain now. In other words, if I'm going to say harei olai to bring an oila, a kosher person would not make such a statement because they're chayiv and achrayis, and if they don't bring it sooner or later, they're going to be violating the we're going to learn soon. They're going to be delaying it. They're going to be violating loisa achar. If I make an adava, that's how kosher people bring karbanis. They designate an animal. They don't say anything. They bring it all the way to the temple. When they're by the temple, they say, this animal is a oila. They make an adava. And they only make the nadava when the animal is there. In other words, they almost make it impossible for their nadava not to be brought. So if a guy says, Harei like nadava is kishedim, then Harei is nadar benazar bekarben. All right. If he's saying, if I'll eat by you, harei like kinidvais kishedim. The kishedim make nadavais. So what he meant to say is that if I'll eat by you, I have to make a vow of nazirus, and I have to take a carbon. One thing is never a shavua. Kishedim never make oaths. The chol kinui carbon ke carbon. Another din. L'chayda, you can ask. The guy never says, I'm taking upon myself to bring a carbon. That's the way I understand Pshat and the Rambam. But since we know that when it comes to making a vow explicit to bring a carbon, even if you don't say carbon, if you say other words that are slang for carbon, it's machayiv you to bring a carbon. So harei olai kinidvois kishedim is also a kinoi of how you take upon yourself to bring a carbon. I'm speaking all in the case that I gave. If I'll eat by you, then harei olai kinidvois kishedim. If I ended up eating, I'm not chayev for violating an oath. I never made an oath, but then I'll have to become a nazir and I'll have to bring a carbon. Halacha Yud Beis. Ein hanoider v'loyem esnadav chayev. Another rule. piv v'libay shavin. Even though we're going to learn soon that really you don't even have to verbalize anything. But if you say, you have to have intent to what you said. For example, if a person wanted to say Harei Olai Oila, and the word that came out was Shlamim, or the opposite. Harei Zu, Nadava, Harei Zu Oila, and he said Zu Shlamim. Loi Amar Klum, Chlal garnished. L'schaven Linder Ba'oila. And he said a word Karbin. Now Karbin doesn't exclude an Oila. Karbin is just a very generic word. That is effective. Lindoir Bechedem. And he said Hegdish, Dvarav Kayamim. Because an Oila is a Karbin. And Chedem can go to the Hegdish. As we learned the whole sugi of Chedem, sometimes Chedem goes to the Kayhana, but Chedem can go to the Berek HaBayis. Now, when do you have to have Piv Li Shavin if there was a Piv? But says that Amma Ben Adava and Adava is saying Sarach Leitzi B'Svasav, B'Chal, you don't have to say anything. Elim Gamar B'Liboy, even if you only had a Hachlata, you made a Kabbalah, I'm going to do something, even if you never articulated it, Chayiv. Ketzat. Gomar Baliboy, he looked at an animal and he was so thankful to God, and he says, wow, God, this animal is an oila. Or, I'm going to bring an oila. Hadei Chayev Lahavi. And that's coming from the pasuk Kol Nidiv Liboy. Even if the generosity was only still in your heart, Yiviyeha. The Nidivas Halev is Chayev Lahavi. Wow, the power of kavana, especially when it comes to hegdish. Halacha Yud Gimel. Echad nadarim unadavos im sha'ar advarim sha'arim chayvem, from arachim, from damim. We learned all about this above. Maisres, matnas aniyim, all of them mitzvahs asay min ha'torah. It's a positive commandment. Sheyavi hakol beregel shepagah b'tchila. You should bring it at your first opportunity, which means whenever you made the vow, which regel is next? If someone were to make this vow now, the next regel is Pesach. We're learning this Beis Gimel Mar Cheshvan, Tavshin Pei Gimel. So next regel, if a person makes this vow a week before Pesach, saying Pesach. The positive is the first regel. Shenemar, as it says in Parshas Re'eu, Basa Shama, and when you come there, then bring all of your vows. V'haveisim Shama. When you're going to celebrate, Tavi Kol Mashat Chayboy, and the Titin Kol Chayv Sholecha Lisham. If the Yom Tov came, V'loy Hevi, now first you already violated the positive commandment. Here you see why again Kshedim never make Nedarim. They make Nedavos, but why would they make a Ned? Ovru Olav Shalosh Regalim, if 3 Yomim Tovim passed, and even though, again, this was a 5-way machlokes tanoim, that Rambam is paskening, it doesn't have to follow the order. Rambam is saying, whenever you made the vow, if after you made a vow, the first regel came and went, you violated an asay. If 3 regalim came and went, now you violated Bal Ta'achar. By the way, you're not going to get malchus for Bal Ta'achar because it's a lav she'ein by Maase. Or you didn't bring the arachim, the charabim, v'adamim after 3 yomim toivim. Not only did you already after the first regel violate the asay, harei za'avar b'lois aseh. Shenema lois ha'achar l'shalmoi. Eino over b'lois aseh at sheyavru olav ragle shana kula. However, ve'ein loikin alav zeh lefi she'ein boi maise. Halacha yud dalit higdish behemel hamizbeach, and 2 regalim came and went. So the asay you violated. We're speaking now about the lav. But now the animal got blemished. And you did what you're supposed to do. So you redeemed the animal. You used the money to get another animal. When are you chayiv bal ta'achar? So we view the new heg, the new animal, you begin again to count. A full 3 regalim. Amazing. Another din, both a man and a woman equally violate the Bal Ta'achar, but the Yoireish, who's bringing his father's carbon, in Oivel Bal Ta'achar, Bechlal, because he never made that vow. He should bring it for his father, but he's not violating. Halacha Tezvav. Kol Hakorbanos she'avru aleim shalosh regalim. The animal itself, Lo nifsalu, did not become invalidated. I want you to know that don't forget there are other dinim when it comes to the age of an animal. But you could have, even for animals that have to be brought within their first year, you can have 3 regalim going by with the animal being 7 months old, right? If it was born right before Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot is within 7 months. Other animals can be brought, like we learned, a para, is for second and third year. No, of course, if the animal has another invalidation, it cannot be brought. But just because the animal was not brought, the gavra violated. The cheftza remains okay. Now, after the 3 Yom Tovim passed, it's not that, okay, you violated once. No. Every single day there's another violation. And therefore, based in mitzuvin, they have to coerce him. Now, coercing a person, halacha tazayin, does it not say l'ritzoynoi? L'ritzoynoi means he has to bring it willfully. Yeah, it does. So the solution is, you coerce him to the point where part of the coercion is for him to say, I want. Simple solution. Even if he was mafresh, but he didn't bring it. Balta acher is when you don't bring it. Final halacha yud zayin kol chayovei oilus ushlamim. One of the means that were done. Yes.
Sorry. We're coercing him, but he doesn't mean it. He has no kavanah. How is that a valid coercion?
So the Rambam already explained this by Hilchas Gerushin that also a get is only valid if a man gives it to his wife when the man wants. Whenever the halacha says that a man has to give it, says the Rambam, deep down, Kevan, we all want to do what God wants. The only thing is that the Yetzer Hara is the one that is coercing us. The Rambam writes that. So when you're beating the person, you're only beating the Yetzer Hara. You're not the Yetzer Hara is being beaten, allowing for the Yetzer Tov, for the godly soul to come out. Now, halacha yudzay. Kol chayav yolis shlamim. You take Beis Din will take a mashkin. That's a good way of, the good coercion. The guy likes his fancy car. They take his car away. You want your car back? Bring the car back. Again, however, when a person is chayv achatas and an asham, they don't have to take a lateral. Why? Because this guy knows that he will only get atonement if they bring it. That in itself will coerce them to bring it. See, a oil and a shlamim is a donation. Many people, they make a vow to a donation, they don't pay it. They feel, I know nothing was given to me. I'm not stealing from anyone. But if I have to bring it for atonement, there's already more security on behalf of Beis Din that this person will follow through. However, not always. Chatas nazir. A nazir is allowed to bring the yayin after he brings one of his karbanis and he cuts his hair and burns it under it. So he can bring the shlamim and I'll bring the chatos. So there, shema yachar oisa, we are afraid that he's going to delay it. Lefikach mamashkin and oisa leo, to guarantee that he won't come. This is all guaranteeing that he should not or she should not come to delay and violate the Balta Achar. Now, final Pedic for today's Pedic Tezvav. It's short, but it's a loaded chapter. Pedic Tezvav is going to give us one of the few great applications of a topic of when a person makes two statements, one right after the other. There's different ways of analyzing what that person had in mind. Either they made statement number one and they made a retraction, and statement number two is the retraction. Well, I'll give you the example in a moment. And you should know that even though that in most areas in the Torah, if you make a retraction, betoich kedei dibur, right away after you made the first statement, the retraction is valid. Kachim is one of, I think there's 4 or 6 exceptions, where even toich kedei dibur, you cannot change your mind. However, we don't say that you're making a retraction. As we'll see in a moment, the Rambam paskins based on the reality that one's mouth cannot make two statements at the same time. So there are times that you have to say, paragraph number 1, paragraph number 2, and you see from the context that the guy really meant to say the whole thing initially, but he needed to break out what he's saying in different statements, and we say that the second statement is simply clarifying what he had in mind from the outset, and therefore it's not a retraction. Will be a great example as we'll just begin in this Pedic. And you know what, let's just begin this because there's going to be a lot of nuanced dinim in this Pedic. Pedic Tezvav only has 8 halachas, and let me begin the following. We began in the beginning of the Sugi of Hakorbanos, if you remember, some animals can only be male, right? A oila can be a male, only male. Shlamim can be male and female. So you should know it's possible for someone to consecrate an animal for a shlamim, and the animal, if it's a female, could already be pregnant. Now, if I never spoke about the fetus, if I go over to my female animal and I say that you are my shlamim, then the fetus is a limb of the mother. Everything becomes a shlamim. But that's only if I made a statement stam. What happens if I want to separate the mother from the fetus? So the ideal way of doing it is first speaking about what would you like the fetus to be, and then speak about what you would like the mother to be. Because again, if you only speak about the mother, this animal is a shlamim, automatically the child will be a shlamim as well. If you want for the child, if it's male, to be an oila, so halacha aleph says, if you begin in the ideal way by saying, V'lada shel zu oila, the child of this pregnant animal, I'm consecrating as an oila. You're only speaking about the fetus. And the mother will be a shlamim, amachaya. Here it's great. However, what happens if the first statement is the mother is a shlamim? And Chevra, if you would stop, the mother is a shlamim, what would be the din? The child would by default also be a shlamim. But then right away you said, but the child should be an oila. If we were to view the second statement of the child, the fetus, and oila, if we were to view that as a retraction, then that retraction would not be valid. You cannot make a retraction even toichel edibur. The Rambam paskins, behoil ve'ein apeh yachal odaber shnei devarim ke'echad, you lechatchila meant the mother should be a shlamim, the child should be an oila. And therefore, here also, it's not viewed as the retraction, devarav kayamim. But ve'im achar shegam beliboy v'hoitze b'svasav shetia shlamim. But if you know, God knows what you know. The Eibishter knows. If I said on the mother that was pregnant, it's a shlamim. When I made that statement, I never thought about the fetus. Even though I didn't think about the fetus, halacha says the fetus is a limb of the mother is a shlamim, the fetus is a shlamim. Then I say, the fetus should be a oilam, garnished, that's not valid. But even if you made that statement immediately, within the time that it takes to say Shalom Alach Rebbe, you cannot make a retraction. Halacha beis, another din. If a person makes a statement, the hand of this animal is an oila, or the leg of this animal is an oila. So first of all, we have a pasuk from where we learn, right? It says, Mikoil asher yitein mimenu lashem. Mikoil learns that if I give some of it, it doesn't always automatically grab all of it. So my commitment was only for the hand. But you can't bring a hand up on the altar. I never committed more than the hand. So the solution is like this. Find a person who already is obligated to bring an oila. Someone is looking to buy an animal for an oila. Sell your animal to that person. Now, when you sell that animal, the money that you receive, excluding the value of that limb, is not consecrated money. But the part of the payment that you're getting, which is equivalent to the value of that limb, however that's evaluated, since you already pledged that to God, so that money is also not yours. What did you accomplish? What you accomplished now, that money will be added to other monies and another oila will be bought. But what you accomplished is that you made sure that the hand or the leg will be offered as an oila. But now we have another problem. The other problem is that this guy that's chayiv an oila, let's say he made a pledge. I'm going to bring an oila. How can that person fulfill his pledge when he's not buying a whole animal? He made a pledge to give a whole animal. He's buying an animal, the money, even if he gave money for that limb, that money, he's not buying that. It's not his. It's not his limb. It's the limb of someone else's pledge. You chap the problem. So that's why this is really, that problem is brought up in the Yerushalmi, and that's what the solution for that is. You know when it's going to be valid? If a person made a pledge, I pledge to bring an oila in the amount of $1,000. Once I specified a number of money, if I spent $1,000 for an animal that went up as an oila, even if I didn't really buy all of it, because one limb was already designated as an oila, I did fulfill my pledge, because the money that I designated was fully used in the purchase of an oila. Okay. Now, when do we say from this pasuk that we quoted, Mikoil Asher Yitem Mimeno Lashem Mikoil V'Loi Kol, that just because you consecrated the limb, it catches the limb, tzchal on the limb, but it doesn't spread? That's only if it's a limb that the animal can live without. But if he says the heart of the animal or the head of the animal, cutting off the heart or the head, the animal cannot live. Now, hare kula oilam. Higdish Eiver Echad Min Ha'oif. Now the pasuk that we quoted again that tells us that there is a chalois kedusha on only one limb from Mikoil Asher Yitim Emeno Lashem. That pasuk is speaking about a behemoth, not about a bird. So in the Gemara there's a doubt. Higdish Eiver Echad Min Ha'oif. Hadei Safik Im Neskadish Kuloi Oile Neskadish. Halacha Gimel. Ha'oimer Behemozu Chetzya Oila. Guys, halt up. If a person says this animal, half is an oila, half is a shlamim, can't be. This animal can either only be one or the other. So the pshat here will be all of the animal is consecrated. None of it is going to be brought because it's called, you have two kedushos that are mixed together. So what should you do? You have to sell it. But since this statement is strong enough to imbue the animal with kedushas haguf, you have to redeem it. You can only redeem an animal that's not blemished only after it gets a blemish. So tira achi ipul b'mum, you cannot blemish it directly. We're going to have this concept used many times. You allow it to pasture until sooner or later it will get blemished. Now that it's blemished, now you get to sell it. You take whatever money you get, half of it goes for an oila and half of it goes for a shlamim. That's the way you fulfill your vow. Now, now it's going to get even more nuanced, more interesting. Guys, chayiv chatas. And this genius says, half of this animal is a chatas, half is an oila. Or half chatas, the other half is oila or shlamim. He mentioned chatas first, and then he mentioned the other options. Or if he mentioned the other options first, and then he mentioned chatas. And chatas. Now you got a problem. Ultimately, the animal will have to be let to die, as we will learn in the laws of chatois hamesos. Now let me explain like this. Koydem kol, by other karbanos, generally, if the carbon cannot be brought, then you wait until it gets blemished and you sell it, and with the money you're going to buy a carbon in its place, or with its money you're going to buy a carbon oilas tzibur leketz hamizbeach. Chatos is unique. Halacha l'Moshe Messinai that there are 5 chatois that, if something happened, nothing can be done with that animal. You don't wait for the animal to get blemished. You cannot sell the animal. You cannot make use of the animal. You have to actually indirectly cause the animal to die. One of the 5 chatois hamesos is if there is a chatos, and as we mentioned in the previous chapter, by the donations of karbanos, you cannot donate a chatos. You can only designate a chatos if you did a sin for which you chayiv a chatos. So a guy ate chelav. He designated the behemoth. The animal, let's say, got lost. He wanted to get atonement. So he designated another animal, and he brought the other animal. Now we found the original animal. The problem here is that the owner already has atonement. That's called a chatos sheneschaperu ba be'oleho. If the owner already got atonement, that animal has to be let to die. Now let's bring it back to our case. What did we say in the beginning of Halacha Gimel? That if I designated animal half and half, I can never offer that animal. I can never offer that animal. Which means I will have to bring another chatos. Since I know now I'll have to bring another chatos, we already view this animal as a chatos and a schapru ba'aleh. How great is that? Because I will have to bring another animal. So I'm going to get my atonement. So this is going to be an animal that's imbued, half of it is imbued with Kedushas Chatos, and we said before it's Kedushas Haguf. V'haraya, in the beginning of Halacha Gimel, you can't just sell it. You have to wait until it gets blemished. So even though you don't yet have an atonement, it's as if you have an atonement, and now this animal has to be let to die. Gavaldik. Halacha Dalid, Behemas HaShutvim, that we said two partners could together consecrate an animal, right? Not a mincha, but yes, an animal, yes, a bird. Shehigdish echad mehem chetzyo shaloi. Now here, they both two people own the animal. So each one owns half. One guy says, mine is Kaddish. The other one, and then he goes and he bought the half of his partner. And again he consecrated the second half, Kereva, which is great. And the Rambam writes many reasons why that works. He's troubled. He's going like, nacha reason. Afalpi, shemitchilasa duchuya haisa, because you couldn't have offered it in the outset because you only were magdash half. That's what we learned in Halachi Gimel. But since ikeshegdash chetzia, nevertheless, it was not that it was valid and then it got pushed away. From the outset, it was pushed away. So first of all, something that's lechatchila duchuya is not so problematic. Which is why when you purchase, if you purchase the second half and your magnet it could be brought. Now, furthermore, by the way, Kedushas Damim, according to most of the commentators, is not Kedushas Damim versus Kedushas Haguf. It means that even though it had Kedusha, it is a Dichoy, it had holiness. But another detail, since this inability to bring it was only when the animal was alive, so there's another rule, Ein Balachayim Nidachim. Another nuance, the animal was actually fit to be brought. Had the other partner consecrated the other partner's half, lechatchila, everything would have been shalom al Yisrael. Lefikach, therefore, now that even though it came at a later time, you bought it and you were magdish it, tikrav, and to the point that it's so holy that this animal can also be used as a temura. Of course, not lechatchila. You're not allowed to make a temura, but if this animal was used for a temura, as we'll learn later, then the temura will be effective. Like this chapter has these nuances. Halacha, hey, hoimer demei behemazu oila. Demei behemazu oila. Now, what does it sound like? It sounds like you're not consecrating the animal. You're consecrating the value of the animal. Ke'ilu, I'm going to sell the animal, and the money I'll use for an oila. You know what? If this animal is shalom, if it's a tamim, it becomes an oila. Or if you say harezu le'oila, literally again it means not that this will be an oila. This is for an oila. It means I'm going to sell the animal, and its proceeds I'll use for an oila. That's what you said. Nevertheless, if this animal is ru'uya likar of oila, oila has to be male. If you remember, all karbanis have to be tamimim, not balimumim. We also learned you can bring a carbon from a tumtum, from an anandrogenous. It can be a treifa, it cannot be kalayim, it cannot be yotzadoifen. No, if it met all of the prerequisites, even though you only said the money, the value, niskacha kedushas haguf. Wow. However, it was blemished. Balmum and a keva for an oil. You can never bring an oil in a keva. Then timacher. Then what your words will have. Then you have to keep your word. It doesn't go beyond what you said. The yavi be the mea oil. Halachavav. Omar al behema tameya v'chayitze b'misurei hakorban she'ein kedusha chalaleyem. What did you say that what? That harei elu oila. Harei elu oila. Now, those words don't work. They can't be. But if you said harei elu le oila, that's the whole vart. No problem. You never made a statement that it will become. You're designating it for an oila. That's what you meant. Sell it and bring the yavi b'demeim oilos. Now what happens? Ha'omer halacha zayin demei para zu la'oila kol shloishim yoim. You're making a statement. In the case where your statement will only imbue it with kedushas damim, but you want for your kedushas damim to be bound only for 30 days. And that was the whole sugya, guys, we learned together in the Gemara, whether, if I say that this will have monetary kedusha for 30 days, does it automatically leave after 30 days? Or no, or you have to redeem it. Without redemption, it doesn't leave. The Rambam paskins that it automatically leaves. So it's a crazy thing. It means if a guy says like this animal, its value, for this 30 days, he's saying it should be an oila. Which means if I'll sell it within 30 days, the money has to go for an oila. If I'm going to sell it after 30 days, then it should go to a shlamim. Now, we began this chapter based on the premise, if I imbue this animal with Kedusha Shlamim, I cannot make it into an oila. An oila cannot be made into a shlamim, but here it's only Kedusha's damim. And the Rambam paskins that if Kedusha's damim lechatchila was only lizman, the Kedusha leaves. Wow. Oy, she'amar, demel shlamim kol shlashim yoyim, ula'achar shlashim yoyim la'oila, devarav kayamim. The Kedusha, the Shaina, goes away by itself. And then therefore do what you said. Maybe Mamish Gavaldik. And final halacha, Ches. And V'amar im Yolda Zachar Areu Oila. Means you don't even know what the fetus is. And you're saying that if the fetus will be male, it should be an oila. If the fetus will be female, it should be zivchei shlamim. Such a statement is valid. And therefore, if Yolda Zachar, you can have oila. Yolda Nekeva, tikrav zivchei shlamim. What happens if you have twins? Mazel tov. You got to bring both. So depend. If one was Zachar, one was a Nekeva, then it's easy. If twins, you didn't even know that, but you said a child, a male child, you meant however many children. Both Zacharim. Now listen to here. You said that the child will be an oila. You spoke in the singular. You made a nether to bring one. So if there were two children, both male, one should be brought, and the other one should be sold litzarchei oila. Litzarchei oila, for the sake of an oila. No, the value of the second one has to go for an oila, but the animal itself only one. And with that animal, after you sell it, v'damav chulin. Same thing if two twins and they were both nekevos. One itself is brought as a shlamim. Shniya timacher litzarchei shlamim, but the mea chulin. Now, what happens if the animal gave birth to a tumtum, to an androgenes? These are animal types, like we just mentioned, that bechlal can never be consecrated as a korban, enim kadeshin, and they don't have to be used for anything. It's not zachar, it's not nekeva. So nothing happened, so there's no kedusha. Nothing has to be redeemed. Finally, v'hamagdish ubar b'me'ei balas mum, if the mother is a balas mum, even here, you have the ability to consecrate just the fetus. That's a machlekes between Rabbi Yechanan, between Bar Pada, and the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yechanan. That was great.